Hello from Learn Channel Studio. Welcome for a new episode that is dedicated to contract management trends in 2022. My name is Philip, I'm your host for today, and with us in the studio today is Mr. Martin Chalkley, an expert trainer with more than 15 years of experience in supplier relationship management, sourcing strategy development, tender preparation, and performance management. We will discuss with him the latest trends in the field of contract management. And Martin, it's a pleasure to welcome you to the show.
It's a pleasure to be here, Philip. Thank you for inviting me.
Excellent. Martin, in the wake of the disruption unleashed by COVID-19, organizations are being compelled to rewrite their contracts, among other things. So what were the biggest changes that this pandemic brought through in this field?
I think if we really look at the impact of COVID-19, coronavirus, into the world of contracts, it was many companies having to really sit back and take stock of how are we actually doing business. It was thinking, does the contract that I've got in place actually support my ability to do business? We're looking at what is the flexibility that has been built into my contracts. We're looking at things such as minimum volume commitments and to what extent am I actually committed within my supply. If I look at some companies in the United Kingdom, suddenly having to do mass cancellations of orders from as far afield as Bangladesh, say in the clothing industry. And it's really starting to impact our view across the entirety of our supply chains. Many companies have got ability to see into their tier one suppliers, their immediate supply chain. But the ability to see into our tier two, our tier three, our tier four, what's happening outside of our immediate sphere of influence is actually devoid in many companies. So it really is starting to sit there and say, what's actually happening through my supply chain? Where's my supply coming from? Is there liquidity in my supply chain? Because maybe my immediate supplier is actually going to be fine in my tier one, but their suppliers may be suffering. So there's a real need for many organizations to actually build the relationships that exist into their tier ones, their tier twos, their tier three supply to be able to see across this. And as a result, it's looking at the terms, the conditions that actually support our ability to do business, building in change management processes, building in flexibility, having a much better understanding of the force majeure clauses, the acts of God, because ultimately many companies were sitting there waiting until I think it was March the 20th when the World Health Organization actually declared COVID-19 to be a pandemic. That declaration meant that many organizations could suddenly invoke their force majeure clause, the excused performance from being able to deliver on their contracts. And what we're seeing is a much tighter requirement for things around contingency planning. COVID-19 isn't the only problem that have been facing many organizations. Obviously, it's the big global one that we've been seeing recently, but if I go to my country, we had massive shocks as a result of Brexit. And being able to ensure that we've got sufficient materials, goods in our warehouse to be able to continue to deliver. So things like stockpiling. And what we've really, I think, learned through the whole of COVID-19 is that we need to have sound relationships through our supply chain. It can no longer be, us and them. It's no longer sort of a two-way partisan relationship. We've actually got to work together. We've got to work together in order to be able to ensure that you're successful, my successful, because we're all dependent upon each other. And this is how supply chains, supply networks ultimately are operating, I think.
All right. So, Martin, what kind of challenges did the contract management professionals face due to these changes?
Well, naturally, the first one was we're all going to be working from home, which I'm sure many people enjoyed, probably for about 2 months, and then getting lonely. And hey, I've actually now talking to people over video rather than actually seeing people face to face. So there's a whole change in our working practices that individuals had to adapt to. The ability to, for example, do contract reviews. Before, we could get together in a meeting room and we could sit down and we could be reviewing the contracts, the terms and conditions in a holistic way as a group of individuals. But now suddenly it's via MS Teams or it's over Zoom. And that distance for some people is actually quite hard to overcome. The commitment may not necessarily be there, the focus may not necessarily be there, and that ability to split working life from home life probably became quite an issue for a number of people. But beyond that, new skills that people had to learn. You know, we're sitting here face to face, and many people, if we're doing negotiations, how do we want to do it? We want to do it in a face-to-face manner, because we can see the honesty, the trust, we can build that relationship in what we're doing. But the moment I go to doing it in some virtual manner, there's that distance, that video camera that we're looking into, if we're turning our cameras on, and some people don't want to, suddenly creates a sense of distance between the parties. If we're resorting to email, everybody knows that we suddenly become a little bit less sincere on email. I can see the sincerity in your eyes talking to you here, but is the same sincerity there in the email? Do I trust? Do I want to go the same sort of extra mile to be able to satisfy you in those virtual negotiations? So how we do virtual negotiations has become a real learning point, I think, for many organizations. And it's one of those things that comes out in many of the courses that I've been delivering in the last 2 years, because I've been now doing lots of teaching online for 2 years and having to learn, for me, an entirely new skill versus actually teaching in a classroom. It's a very different experience. But I think if we go beyond that, you know, a number of companies started to collapse in COVID-19 times. And we now find that we've got consolidation of supply, which for some companies has meant that they're now into a monopolistic relationship. I can't actually get my product from anywhere else. I've now only got one supplier left that I can actually purchase my product from. That's a very different, potentially ambiguous relationship that needs to be conquered. So I'm looking at contingency planning as a contract manager, because I need to make sure that I'm ensuring that continuity of supply into my business. I need to be understanding exactly what's available within my contractual mechanisms. What can I use? What levers can I pull within the contract in order to be able to ensure that my business survives? But I actually also need to ensure that my supplier's business survives, that my customer's business survives, because every supplier needs a customer. And customers need suppliers because they provide the expertise upon which we ultimately rely. So it's, as I said earlier, keeping that liquidity in the supply chain. It's the flexibility. How can we work together? How do we change our mechanisms? It's thinking, where am I going to supply from? Do I bring the activities back in-house? Do I actually build up my own strength, my own capability? Maybe I need to pull some of those activities from faraway lands back to within the borders of my country in order to minimize the disruption of physical supply. If you think back, there was the ship, I think it was called the Ever Given, that got stuck in the Suez Canal.
Yes.
Okay, this isn't coronavirus related, but ultimately that's $900 million of stock sitting on a ship that's also causing many other ships to suddenly have problems in their supply chain. These kinds of shocks come along every 3.7 years. Some of the research is showing that, you know, obviously coronavirus, it's the big international one that we've all seen, but many businesses have this kind of shock every 3-4 years. We need to make sure that we've got the mechanisms there to be able to ensure that our contracts ensure that continuity of supply and build the relationship between the parties. And I think the biggest one is ultimately we need to understand that we've got to manage our relationship. We've got to manage our reputation. And history shows that those organizations that market well through this kind of disruption, who communicate well through these kinds of events, they tend to come out the other side okay, because their customers, their suppliers know and understand what is happening. Those that don't communicate so well, ultimately it affects their reputation. And reputational damage ultimately can be incredibly hard to overcome. So I hope that's an insight as to the challenges that many of our contract managers have actually faced.
The best practices in contract management are constantly evolving to meet shifting customer demands. So what would you name as the currently best contract management practices?
The currently best contract management practices are really the contract management practices that should have been the best for the last century, to be perfectly honest with you, because there's some very common pitfalls that absolutely we see repeated over and over and over and over again. And the biggest pitfall that we have in contracts is a lack of clear scope and goals. It's customers not thinking and putting in the required levels of detailed thought and information about what it is that they actually want. We rush to the market because we think we need to buy something to solve a problem, but we haven't really fully evaluated what that problem is. I could give you 1,000 examples related to my government about procurement exercises where my government has gone, tell you what, the way we solve that problem is by buying something. But actually, we need to buy the right thing. So we need a really clear scope and goals. The second pitfall that has been identified by World Commerce and Contracting is that we engage the contracts department too late. That they get into, somebody from the business will turn up and say, I need this contract in place. And we'll say, when? And they'll say, Friday. And we'll say, when did you know about it? And they say, 6 months ago. And you're only telling me now? Procurement and contracts is more than just a processing department. It's a core critical competence within the organization. In fact, ask yourself this question. How much would your company be worth if it didn't have any contracts in place? And the reality is, it wouldn't really be worth very much at all. Some assets, some physical infrastructure, maybe a car and some buildings and that kind of thing. But what puts the value into our companies is the contracts that we actually are engaged in with other parties. They drive the revenue, they drive the money. So for me, who's the most important people within any organization? It's not the salespeople. It's the guardians of the contracting process. And we should be engaging with those continuously in order to ensure that the contracts we're letting drive the economic value into our companies. And the third biggest pitfall that organizations have is a complete failure to engage all of the stakeholders. We don't go far and wide enough in understanding what it is that we want to do. We kind of think, well, I know what's best. And we get into business, and lots of people in business think that it's a sign of weakness to go and ask somebody else a question about how should I do this. No, it's not. It's a sign of strength. It's a sign of bringing people together, because together we are greater. So those are three from our sort of top pitfalls reactions, but having an electronic contracting strategy, looking at contract lifecycle management, because many procurement contracts departments, their job stops the moment we sign a contract, and then we go meh to somebody in the business and say, manage this, without even telling them what it is. Nobody left school thinking what I really want to be in life is a contract manager. Maybe I wanted to be an astronaut or a physicist or a racing car driver, but nobody thinks I want to be a contract manager. And yet they're all around us continuously, every single day. It's the one thing that we all do. Contract management and delivering on contracts is pretty much in everybody's jobs. So let's have a strategy, an electronic strategy. Get away from these pieces of paper. Let's digitize what we're doing, digitalize our processes. Let's treat that contract. Now, when you say the word contract to people, they think legal document, lawyers, risk management, something that I'll pick up when things are going wrong. No, those are the last people that should be using the contracts in your business, because you go to them when things are going wrong. But what is a contract there to do? It's to drive economic value between the parties. The supplier is there to make money. The customer is there to make money through the efficiencies of having the supplier delivering for them. So what is the purpose of a contract? First and foremost, it's getting across to every organization that I work with, this is an economic tool. This is your future security. So please, please, please treat it as an economic tool, an operational tool to help us deliver business. Audit your terms and conditions. Do they make you attractive to do business with? If you're attractive to do business with, people want to work with you, you'll have great income. If you're difficult to do business with, people don't want to work with you. We like to work with those we like. We don't want to work with those we don't like. Same with your contracts. If your contracts make you difficult, people don't want to work with you. I'll give you my B team, but you're not going to get my A team. So these are some of the best practices that I've seen. And ultimately, how do we overly classify this? The contracts department needs to become the trusted advisor to the business. Use our experience, use our knowledge, because that's really what's going to drive the security and the safety of our organizations.
What changes would you expect to see to these practices in the near future?
The first one is a need to digitize. So to move away from pieces of paper, that day is gone. We're in a digital world. We need to start to think in a digital terms. So click wrap agreements. I can create all the terms and conditions that are necessary, and then I can allow the business to potentially even create their own terms and conditions. I don't even need to necessarily give them a template contract. I can have automated processes that say, if you choose this term, these are the subsequent terms that would automatically apply. If you choose that term, these are the terms that would automatically apply. So we can start to consider, when we're delivering on this future world, how can we automate what we're doing in contract management? We're sitting there thinking, well, tradition is a supply chain. Information flows up and product flows up the supply chain. Money flows down the supply chain. At the bottom, you've got the farmer. At the top, you've got the shop. And somewhere in between, you've got the mill who's doing the work. The product flows up to the shop and the money flows down to the farmer. It's a very traditional approach, and it's how lots of people think about supply chains. But the reality is we're now in a highly interconnected world. We need to move away from that supply chain. We need to start thinking in terms of networks and ecosystems where the money and the information is flowing in both directions, where we're sharing knowledge, where I'm understanding what's actually happening at the shop, even though I'm in the agricultural field, and the people in the shop need to understand what's happening in the field. It's not that we're just looking at a single tier up and a single tier down. So it's really starting to think networks, ecosystems. It's about recognizing that we need to start to embed that relationship back into the contract. Too many years have been spent blaming the supplier, blaming the customer. All blame is wasting money. Let's get rid of the blame. Let's have a no-blame culture. Let's have a problem-solving mentality where we work together to actually try to deliver outcomes. Let's look at actually giving outcome contracts. I don't tell you what to do and how to do it. I tell you this is why I need this contract in place, and you tell me how you think you should deliver it and what it is you're going to do for me. Who are you? You're my expert. That's why I'm employing you. If I'm the expert and I'm employing you, I just want you as a resource. But ultimately, what do I really want? I want to use the expertise that's in the marketplace. So again, we need to start thinking, and we need to start moving towards relationship contracts, relational contracts, new standards, new principles, a new idea of how do we actually want the contract to support our business.
Keeping pace with today's digital marketplace has forced organizations to address the inefficiencies in their current contract management strategy head on. Now, what can you tell our viewers about the accelerated digital transformation in the contract management field?
So the first thing, we need to separate out digitization and digitalization. Digitization is taking pieces of paper, turning them into electronics, electrical infrastructure within our organization. Digitalization is then using those to create transparency, to look at things like artificial intelligence, to start using things like the blockchain, to be able to do intelligent predictions of when are our terms and conditions actually going to become an impact to us, to be able to use things like big data to predict trends in our marketplace so that we can then use the contractual levers, and we can create the contractual levers derived from that artificial intelligence that we're seeing within our contractual supply chains. We're wanting to get, as I said earlier, much greater visibility into tier 2, into tier 3, into tier 4. People like Procter & Gamble, major international companies, they run what they call a sort of a control tower approach to the way they manage their supply chain. They're not just looking at their contracts, they're looking at the weather forecasts, they're looking at the shipping infrastructure. They're sitting there looking at traffic flows, and they're automating their delivery cycles based upon all of this information sources that's coming into their organization, because the reality, that drives their efficiency. This digital world is transparency across our supply chain. It's being able to see beyond what's immediately in front of me. It's saying, I've got financial pressures. I need to continue to drive revenue. I need to continue to drive profitability. But I've also got regulatory pressures, health and safety, sector specific, the regulation in the pharma market, pharmaceuticals market versus regulation in the oil and gas market. So I need to also understand how can I interact into those areas. I need to think, more and more about reputational considerations within my marketplace. So I need to start saying, is it actually good for me to be doing business with you? And having that digital insight into what you're doing and what you're achieving is going to allow me much better environmental, social, governance approaches to the way in which I choose then to manage my business. I'm thinking about greater inclusivity, greater diversity. That gives me a much better insight into where my business can improve, can enhance, and greater understanding ultimately of the customers that I'm delivering to. And the last one is using that digital space to start to build much better innovation methodologies. Looking for supplier-led innovation. How are you going to help me? What do you understand about my marketplace to be able to drive the kind of tools, the products that's actually going to make me a better customer and make my customers happier? So this whole digital world is potentially a minefield, but if we can really adapt the way that we choose to work into it, we're going to be on for, hopefully, a long time in this world as an organization.
You have delivered many L3RN trainings to clients across many industries. Now, when it comes to gaining technical knowledge for tackling new challenges, what skills should our viewers be focused on improving?
That's a really good question. And probably I would be looking to some of the outputs that we see from places like the World Economic Forum, who are saying what are the critical trends that we're seeing within businesses. And it's changing on a yearly basis, but we're looking at things like communication skills, the problem-solving skills, the critical thinking type skills. Because when it comes to this world of contracts that I get involved in, I have no idea how many billions of contracts are being created over the centuries, but no two contract is the same. Every contract is different because people get involved. And people are different. So we could have exactly the same contract template in front of us between you and me, but two other people would read and interpret it and have a different relationship. So one of the biggest skills that we need, communications management. Being expert quality communicators and a complete total dedication and commitment to communication. Think about any relationship, and there's plenty that we can look at right now in the world. If the communication fails, what happens? At best, the relationship dies. At worst, it can get even more serious than that. So that ability to communicate is fundamental, and I don't care what relationship it is, from maybe me with my bank through to massive international company working with another massive international company. The ability to communicate between two parties is fundamental and key. So what's aligned to that? One of the best courses I ever did was neuro-linguistic programming. I loved it. It gave me really great insight into how to start to work and talk with people, how to understand building rapport and capabilities. Because if you're in the world of contract management, you're not just working with people inside your own business, you're also working with your suppliers. That puts you in an elevated position of responsibility because you're now looking in two directions at exactly the same time. So you need to be able to build the trust internally and externally to allow you to do your job effectively. So from there, it then leads into the whole world of stakeholder management. Understanding how do I work and how do I manage stakeholders? Who are my stakeholders? And I guarantee you there's always far more stakeholders in any contractual scenario than you might initially have thought. And as contracts develop and as new people come in and other people leave that contractual relationship, you might leave the company and somebody takes over from you, you need to adjust your stakeholder management plans. So doing stakeholder management is another key trend that we need to see within this world of contracts. Critical thinking, negotiation skills. There's been a raft of negotiation training courses and they're probably 10 a penny. But actually, what's happened in the last year and a half, 2 years, as I said earlier, face-to-face negotiation is now a dying art. I need to now learn how to negotiate with you through Zoom. It's a completely different skill. There's all sorts of different tips and tricks and things that we can be doing. We need to be looking at problem solving. We need to be ultimately the master of the art of managing people. So that's where I would be looking as a contracts management person. That would be my first and foremost. Beyond that, more legal knowledge, better understanding of the actual contract terms, the conditions, how to draft contracts, how to create contracts. That's absolutely key. Being able to be culturally aware because, I'm British, you're Macedonian. I need to understand that we come from completely different backgrounds. We need to be able to still converse. So, the cultural awareness is another skill that is absolutely key to what we're trying to deliver. So I would say there's many skills that are out there. Probably everything at the end has some relationship back to contracts.
Being part of L3RN Institute for such a long time and working with L&D professionals, what is your message for them working in the future, and what L3RN courses do you recommend for them to follow all the trends?
9 years. I've been working with you guys for 9 years. And my first recommendation would be go through the entire suite of courses that sit within that procurement and contracts field. So you're looking at not only the CCM program that I deliver, you've got the SRM program that we deliver. I would be saying I actually need to get many of my colleagues to go through maybe a shorter version. There's a 2-day equivalent to that CCMP course that we do that would actually be relevant for pretty much everybody in the organization. So I'll get them to come along on that. I'll be looking at the CIPP. You know, that's another great course delivered by another great trainer. I know many people have had great experiences on that course. I know that you do lots of communication and some of those softer skills courses. I would absolutely be recommending people to head in those directions. So, you know, if you've got the stakeholder management course, let's go and do that. If you've got the communication skills, let's do that. If you've got the report writing skills, let's go and do some of those. So it would be, you know, everything in that particular field would, from your portfolio, the wide portfolio that you have, those would be where I would be initially focusing.
Martin, thank you for sharing all the information. It was a real pleasure having you at the show.
The pleasure was all mine. Thank you for having me. It's been wonderful. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for staying with us. We hope we provided many valuable insights for you. Feel free to tune in for viewing more live stream on LinkedIn or recorded sessions on our YouTube or Vimeo channel. If you think we need to cover a specific topic or a trend, please drop us a comment or send us a message and we'll review it with our team. Until next time, stay tuned.